Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this installment of the Jess Usher Memorial Lecture Series. This lecture is part of the ABAC Arts and Culture program and is named for Dr. Jess Usher, a professor of history who had a profound impact on the lives of his students as well as his ABAC colleagues. It is in his honor that we have named this lecture series. Each of us grew up immersed in the storytelling of friends and family, of myths and legends, from bedtime stories to tales of war told by veterans returning home. These stories shape and mold our individual and our collective mindsets and lead to a retelling of these tales over and over again. All too frequently, the foundation of such legends becomes muddled and lost to history. Tonight, we have the opportunity to see a legend become real. From David and Goliath to fabled Atlantis to Robin Hood and William Tell and others too numerous to count, one stands above them all in the telling and the retelling: King Arthur, Merlin, Guinevere, and the Knights of the Round Table. It is to this legend that our speakers tonight will address themselves. Dr. Tom Grant teaches journalism, broadcasting, and writing at ABAC, working for 30 years in television and newspaper journalism before earning his PhD at the University of Idaho. Dr. Grant earned a bachelor's degree at Washington State and a master's degree from Columbia. Tom was a Mike Wallace Fellow for Investigative Reporting at the University of Michigan and has won numerous national awards, including two DuPont Columbia Awards and the George Polk Award. Professor Kaci West hails from Perry, Georgia. She received her master's degree in English with a concentration in 14th century English literature from the Valdosta State University in 2013. She has been at ABAC since that time, teaching composition, literature, and global studies. Professor West has co-led 3 study abroad trips to Paris, Rome, and northern France. An academic advisor for elementary education, she is also a club advisor for ABAC's Gender Sexuality Alliance. Professor West's master thesis examines the function and representation of women in 14th century English Arthuriana. To a very significant degree, this documentary continues to explore those ideas. Tonight, our speakers will discuss the ideas behind a collective documentary, Stone and Story, about the connection between landscape of England and Wales and the legend of King Arthur and Merlin. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Tom Grant and Professor Kaci West.
Thank you very much to James Gall Brown for introducing us into the Jess Usher Lecture Series, for allowing us to be here tonight. This is the end of a long journey for us, for me in particular, because it started for me 44 years ago when I met an old man who had just returned from Wales, where, as he described it, he had walked in the footsteps of Merlin. Now, I don't think I'd ever contemplated before this idea that figures from literature, even magical figures like Merlin, could leave footprints on the earth. I thought literature was just this realm of the mind, a place where we escaped to and imagined. But over the years, I came to see that stories actually transform the world around us. 20 years ago, I wrote a story about the literary geography of a city out west, Spokane. And after that, I realized that I could never again see Spokane without seeing the literary images there. I can't see Spokane Falls without seeing the ghosts of salmon jumping, which comes from a poem by Sherman Alexie. I can't see the Davenport Hotel without seeing Sam Spade from the Maltese Falcon, which took place, at least part of the story, in that hotel. And I can't see that city sitting in a valley anymore. I always see it as a walled city, thanks to the vision of a poet named Carolyn Kaiser. Now, this transformation of the landscape is much more profound when the story has 1,000 years to sculpt the world. And that's the case with the story of Arthur and Merlin. My colleague, Kaci West, is an expert in that area.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, so historical Arthur was a Romanized Celt around the time of the Anglo-Saxon invasion. But mythical Arthur is first created by Welsh writer Geoffrey of Monmouth around 1138 in his History of the Kings of Britain. You'll hear about Geoffrey a couple of times in our film. His history served two purposes. One, as a noble foundation myth for the Britons, and two, as a foundation myth to share the history of England with the Norman overlords. Geoffrey called on a few scholarly sources, including Bede, Gildas, and other medieval Latin and Welsh oral legends. But his chief source is his very big imagination. Okay. Geoffrey's Arthur is a descendant of Aeneas, Greco-Roman founder of Rome, who fights hordes of Anglo-Saxons away from the magical kingdom of knights and ladies in Camelot. And somehow it all feels like the 12th century. I start with Geoffrey in order to calibrate us. Geoffrey is writing just after the Norman conquest in 1066. Certainly before 1066, a lot had happened, to put it simply. Migrations, invasions, culture after culture, and language after language blending with one another. So two things become intricately related: land and language. As a side note, since England before 1066 was a melting pot of different histories, ways of life, and victories of one people over another, the term English is used to refer to those who inhabited England at the time of the Norman conquest. Okay. After the conquest, the cultural merger of the Anglo-Norman and English fed kings' pursuit of power in England and led to changing of cultural values. The Anglo-Norman king's struggle for legitimization was reinforced by popular texts, especially Arthuriana. Arthur rids England of Saxon invaders, defeats the Scots and Picts, and attacks Ireland and Iceland, gaining loyalty from their kings and princes. Arthur's domination of a greater part of the continent resonates for an Anglo-Norman audience who, in the 11th and 12th centuries, had, and I quote here, conquered Scotland, parts of Wales and Ireland, Sicily and Malta, end quote. So not coincidentally, Geoffrey's history makes Arthur the liege lord of the Bretons, that's the Celts of Brittany in France, as well as the Britons, sorry if I said Bretons, is those in France, and the Britons, the Celts of England. As the descendants of Breton Normandy, the Normans would have understood this representation as legitimization to hereditary rule of both Normandy and England. Okay. So Arthuriana's plasticity continued after Geoffrey's history, as the tradition was disseminated quickly across nations and cultures, with the mytho-history transposed into numerous languages and versions to suit authors' various agendas. What you'll see in our film is our attempt to piece together the changing legend and its characters across a well-trodden landscape, one marked by attempts to pin down languages, borders, and imagination.
Now we're going to play the film for you. It's going to be in parts, but we're going to start at the beginning.
These foothills of Mount Snowdon are one place where King Arthur and I crossed paths. I hiked here in the rain this summer, blistering my heels. Arthur was carried here 1,500 years ago, mortally wounded after his final battle. Or so the story goes. That these mists hide Avalon, the magic island of Morgan Le Fay and her 9 sisters. That this lake conceals Arthur's sword Excalibur, bestowed to Arthur by the Lady of the Lake and thrown back to her before he returned to Avalon. Thousands hike by without seeing Avalon, but I see a liminal space, the veil between the story and the world. A space where legends of Morgan the Healer and Arthur the King have survived for more than 1,000 years, becoming as much a part of the landscape as the mountain itself. A space where my story and my blisters are forever mixed with the legends of Morgan and Arthur, England and Wales, in the cauldron of stone and story.
Now, as Douglas Pocock wrote, a scholar of literature and geography, literary setting often finds its existential existence through the events and experiences that are described in the stories. Then we, as readers, link the environment with the persons and the events to form our understanding of the place. In that way, literature is this reconstitution of experience and a reconstruction of place. It formulates experience, attaches it to the physical, and then serves this socializing role, affirming the emotional impressions of the story. Now, as such, place becomes symbolic for the experience and for the understanding of the experience. Geography itself develops this humanistic layer, one built not from the land or the buildings, but from those observing the land and the buildings. The stories of Arthur and Merlin can be seen as literary reconstructions of important themes of national identity, themes that were written upon stones that were erected, long before those stories were even imagined.
We live in a world of betwixt and between, of shaded overlap between water and land, between Bronze Age and digital. A world where a marker left 1,000 years ago on the moors of Cornwall still tells stories today. But what tales do we see in these giant stones when the series has played for centuries, and the first episode has long been forgotten? Even the canvas it sits upon, now much less temperate and fertile than 3,000 years ago, may change our vision. We're here at the Nine Maidens, and what we're finding is that the land is as important as the stones. The land is intimidating, but it's protective. As an English professor with a deep interest in medieval literature, I see a story that has been erased by time, but has been overwritten by successive voices, much like modern fan fiction for a now forgotten author.
In truth, we just don't know what a lot of these things are.
Computer teacher Carl Smith grew up not far from the Nine Maidens and this nearby round stone called Min en Tol. It's said to be guarded by a pixie who can promote fertility.
The legend says that if you pass through the center stone 3 times, you get pregnant. I've tried it multiple times. I still haven't gotten pregnant yet.
Smith jokes, but he sees a cultural story in these stones. A tale filled with tension because of what we do not know, yet also a story filled with potential because of what we may discover.
As successive cultures have conquered the Isles, they've tried to explain what they've found using their own sort of mythology.
And every stone is an evolving myth.
Those things are all drawn from myths and legends that, like the Merry Maidens, which is very close to here, was allegedly a group of women who were dancing on the Sabbath, and they were turned into rock stones by God's wrath.
But on the day I arrived, God's wrath with Merry Maidens had been dissolved, transitioned, and reincorporated as a playground for families. Simon Costin, director of the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic in Cornwall, says these sites become what we imagine them to be.
It's what we project onto these things. Because we know nothing about what was practiced in them, and why they were constructed quite often, we're only guessing and second guessing and projecting onto them.
There's always been a very intimate connection, I think, between stories and the land.
Carolyn Larrington is an Oxford professor and scholar of Old Norse and medieval Arthurian literature and its representations in popular culture.
What we've had, I think, ever since people started telling stories, is a sense of place, the kind of place where particular things might happen, that you might find marsh spirits around a bog, or you might find where you have huge boulders and mighty landforms. You can see that giants have been at play there and have shaped the land.
And if you look closely at these stones at Boscanoon, you will see them still speaking, the stories still being written, in shells, in ribbons, and in colorful petals. But there are no roses around here. But we can find rose petals dropped all around the ring. That tells us that this space is used for some kind of ceremony. A ceremony in a circle of stones, of priestesses of the Celtic underworld, of sisters of Avalon.
Avalon is really a Celtic term for paradise. It is the other world.
So this term, otherworld, this term pops up all the time in literature, and probably a lot of the time in shows that you watch. And other versions of this term pop up a lot too. You probably have heard of Wonderland or Narnia, or maybe Oz, or if you've watched Stranger Things, The Upside Down. So these veiled worlds look almost like ours, and sometimes they exist right on top of ours, according to the author that you're working with. It might exist right next to ours. But their rules are definitely different. Avalon fits into this list too. So author Paul Broadhurst sees the other world in the sky. Author Paul Broadhurst writes of the liminal world between imagination and landscape. He says the story of Arthur has roots in the prehistory of the British Isles, when its legends were marked in the sky.
The Arthur myth itself is deeply bound up with the cycles of the sun and the stars, because for hundreds of thousands of years people have lived outside, gathering around campfires under the stars. This was the origin of all mythology.
Broadhurst says early people saw Arthur as Ursa Major, circling the North Star.
Now the name Arthur in the old Celtic language means great bear. This is the name also of the most famous of constellations. It's often known as the Dipper or the Plough, but its most ancient name, which I believe goes back hundreds of thousands of years to the times of bear worship, was the Great Bear.
And when Broadhurst tells people of Arthur as the bear, and points out the bear not only in the sky, but in the hill above Boscastle Harbour, it changes the way they see it.
You know, people forget the sky's alive, the land is alive.
Nowhere is the landscape of legend more alive than in Tintagel, thanks to medieval cleric Geoffrey of Monmouth.
With the earliest Merlin Welsh is this wild man of the woods, and this notion that we have of him as this magician figure comes largely from Geoffrey.
University of Cardiff professor Sinead Davies recounts how Geoffrey's 12th century History of the Kings of England says Merlin cast a spell that enabled Arthur's father to pretend to be another man and another wife's husband.
So he saunters into the castle and says to his wife, you know, I'm home, darling. And then they have a night of passionate love, and then he leaves. And from that night of passion, then Arthur is born.
Yet these ruins, where thousands of visitors come to find King Arthur and Merlin, had not even been imagined when Geoffrey wrote of him.
Tintagel Castle is not really a castle at all. Instead, there are signs that it's a castle. Things like old ruins and a statue of the supposed King Arthur.
Yet what people see of Arthur here is almost entirely a literary construction. more like Disney World than Gettysburg. It was imagined by Jeffrey 1,000 years ago and illuminated later by poets and novelists and filmmakers. Now the Fallen Stone has been transformed into commercial saga. Beneath Arthur's castle, even the sand has been transmuted. At low tide, visitors can clamber down to Merlin's cave, a cavern where the stone has been worn away, leaving an emptiness to be filled from imagination.
About a year ago, I dreamed I was in a seaside cave, a lot like this one. Our brain's constantly trying to make sense of our experience. Dreams, art, literature, these things help us to recognize patterns, to see symbols, and to make connections.
Broadhurst says those connections have shaped this natural landscape into the supernatural.
You can feel the magic, the old magic in the land here. It's one of those rare places. And of course, all these cliffs are haunted by the spirits of Merlin and King Arthur, and have been for a very long time.
However, the place most haunted by Merlin and Arthur may be the primordial circle of Stonehenge. So, Stonehenge is a little like that show, Whose Line Is It Anyway? It is what you need it to be, almost precisely. You need a place to worship, check. You need a community center, biggest one on this side of the Atlantic. You need a religious place, you got it. You need a plot device that works as both social commentary and character development. Thanks, Stonehenge. That's what it is.
But Stonehenge is also where Merlin and Arthur are recreated in the modern landscape on every solstice. Now, Geoffrey wrote that Merlin moved Stonehenge to Ireland from the Salisbury Plains. And archaeologists suggest it was built long before Merlin's day, but no one knows who really built it, so Stonehenge remains this tablet for our imaginations and for the imaginations of the contemporary incarnations of both Arthur and Merlin, who are still writing new stories on those old stones. As Silk might say, literature is part of the revolutionary process, wrapping new symbolism in old symbols such as Stonehenge, in hopes of changing our ongoing views of this world.
However, the place most haunted by Merlin and Arthur may be the primordial circle of Stonehenge. Geoffrey said Merlin built this place. Every solstice, thousands trek here. The simply curious, families, green men,
Have you got light?
and all the druidic descendants of Merlin.
I don't call myself Merlin, everybody else calls me Merlin.
Modern druids and writers carve new meanings for these stones with every contact. Stonehenge as a burial site, as an alien landing zone, as a cosmic calendar to support farming.
That's like in North America, they don't have stone circles, they stayed hunter-gatherers. South America, they got stone circles, they got agriculture.
When officials shut down large gatherings at Stonehenge after the COVID pandemic hit, a new story began forming in the drum circles. A story echoed in protests in London and around the world. A story you could hear shouted on the solstice as police forced people back behind the Stonehenge fence lines. Freedom to not be vaccinated. Freedom to not wear masks. Freedom to not be restrained from the stones on sacred days.
Okay, we're here to celebrate the summer solstice. English heritage may not let us in there, but they can't stop us from being here, and they can't cancel Christmas.
Then the more nimble jumped the fences and ran to the stones. The less nimble followed. Police never lifted a hand.
These are our stones!
People drank water from the sacred puddles. People kissed the lichen.
The stones!
The stones!
Then they returned to say prayers with the Druids.
May there be peace in the north. May there be peace in the north. May there be peace throughout the whole world.
May there be peace throughout the whole world.
How do you be?
So much faith.
Carmarthen, in South Wales, is said to be the birthplace of Merlin.
Now, some people say the very name Carmarthen means the castle of Merlin.
Storyteller Nick Brunger says Merlin exists with a foot both in history and legend.
So although Merlin is considered to be a character from fiction, along with Uther Pendragon and Arthur and so on, we know that actually a lot of these individuals did exist.
But the remaining ties between Merlin and the city are a shard of an oak tree, Merlin's oak, that died in 1856, still displayed at Town Hall, and a wooden statue on a downtown mall, across from Burger King. In Carmarthen, no one but me visits the mall to see Merlin. Yet they pass him daily on the way to get a Whopper, or a new purse from TK Maxx. Okay, so we've talked about Avalon. Well, Merlin is Avalon's best sales rep, through and through.
The one thing we see is that the story of Arthur and Merlin has been harnessed for the purposes of tourism. Now, this is not unique to Arthurian legend. I mean, the economic value of literature is harnessed everywhere the stories are told. In Bath, you can take a Jane Austen tour. In Oxford, you can go on Morse tours. I've been on both of those. But a significant criticism of this literary tourism notion is whether they convey something authentic or whether they are staging and rewriting not only the history of the places, but also the stories themselves. Now, we could see Merlin as a wooden magician in front of Burger King. And that is how thousands, perhaps millions of people will see him. But if you go a bit further, and we did, you can see how Merlin's story is intimately tied to the identity of Wales.
Yet the city of Merlin's youth plays an important part in his legend, because he was noticed for something he didn't have: a father.
Many people wondered where the dad was. A boy like that must have a father, many local men said, volunteering to take that position for themselves, but she would have none of it. Oh no, she said, the boy has a father. He was given to him by magic.
And on a nearby mountaintop in Wales, called Dinas Emrys, the magic of Merlin's birth was important. So important that even today, visitors are drawn there. Up this trail, past the dragon bench, past a glistening waterfall, to a hill where the foundational myth of Wales waits with crumbling stones and human hints.
There are subtle indicators here of Welsh history and myth, like this carved eye in a tree of a dragon.
As the story goes, the king wanted to build a fortress here. It wasn't going well. What was built each day would come down each night. So the king's wizards were called.
And they said a sacrifice is called for. We need to sacrifice a boy a boy without a father.
So they brought the child Merlin here. But the boy could see much more than any of the king's wizards. He told the king this site was unstable because 2 dragons were fighting in a hidden lake beneath the ground. And the boy freed the dragons.
And then, with a sound that was like thunder, they rose into the air and started fighting, breathing fire on each other, soared up into the air, coming out above the hilltop. And now the fight was terrifying. Lightning from their flames that came from their mouths heated the air all around. They scorched and charred each other's flanks as they fought one against the other. First the white one was winning, and then the red was on top, and then all of a sudden the red was in the ascendancy, and the white one flew away, chased by the red dragon out over the hilltops until they could see no sign of them other than flashes of lightning from the fire and the thunder in their mouths in the skies. Now you can build your castle, great king, said Merlin. Now the red dragon has defeated the white. And this is a sign of what will always happen here in this kingdom. For the red dragon represents the people of our country, and the white dragon the enemies who would serve to oppress us. And from now on, throughout all of the future, the red dragon will be a symbol of our proud people.
And that is why the Welsh flag carries a red dragon today. On Bardsey Island, off Wales' west coast, myth flows with the sea.
Any significant historical event has Bardsey playing a role in it because everything came past you, always.
Bardsey Island sat on a major shipping lane and hid, some would say, Avalon.
The story goes that King Arthur was roved over to the island of Avalon after being injured in the Battle of Camelon.
One legend associated with Bardsey Island says Merlin lies sleeping in a cave, one that's right over there.
The legend also says that this is where Merlin hid the 13 ancient treasures of Britain: a flaming sword, a hamper of never-ending food, and Arthur's cloak of invisibility. Yet after climbing the hill, what I find is a cave quite unsuited to an eternity of rest.
No Merlin, but a lot of spiders.
Yet believe them or not, the stories attached to this land and resonate in the space between rationality and emotion, even for the most pragmatic of us.
There is a heck of a lot more to life than just what we see, isn't there? There's a lot of energy coming from somewhere. As you get older, you can start to see the patterns in that energy. Can't you? Well, I can anyway. I hope you're the same.
For me, the energy is never greater than in Glastonbury. So Glastonbury, this is the place. This is why I got interested in Arthurian literature. I first visited Glastonbury when I was a student at VSU on a study abroad trip. And Dr. Brian Murray, who is now my colleague, was my professor. I didn't understand the relationship between literature and land until I went to Glastonbury and climbed this tour. And that was a feat, and still is every time I do it. Glastonbury has become intimately tied to Arthuriana for many reasons, but namely that it is Avalon. If there were an Avalon, Glastonbury would have my vote. The legend of Avalon is written large around the rocky mount of Glastonbury Tor. And all the liminal spaces surrounding the Arthurian legend seem to converge here. Joseph of Arimathea, a friend of Jesus Christ, is said to have come here in the 1st century bearing the Holy Grail. He hid the Grail near the Tor, and a spring bubbled up.
The Chalice Well is like an enchanted garden with fairies and spirits.
Nick Draper owns a shoe factory at the base of Glastonbury Tor.
Around this area it's riddled with ley lines, very powerful lines in the ground, and when they cross, it's enormously powerful. And you'll notice in the town there isn't a single normal shop there. They just sell crystals. Well, I mean, in town there's 5 witches' shops. How they keep going, I don't know.
The day I arrive, an anti-vax protest fills downtown, just a few yards from the abbey where 12th century monks reportedly found the bodies of Arthur and Guinevere.
Whether or not that's true or not, I think it's made up by a load of monks to get a load of pilgrims coming in.
The tour, wrote 20th century novelist Marion Zimmer Bradley, was an island in the time of Arthur, surrounded by misty marshes. It is grassy now. Climbing to the top, I walked through a field of sheep. St. Michael's Tower stands at the top, 300 concrete steps above. Bradley saw the tour as 2 spaces in one. On one side of the veil, magic of Morgan Le Fay and Avalon. On the other, the Christianity of Arthur and Lancelot. Yet each side remained hidden from the other by mist of belief and disbelief. On my visit, I hear the drums in the tower and I see it as Bradley did. The sun falls, a mist rises. People sing, chant, dance. Bright red Mars pierces the mist. A fingernail moon hangs between it and a glowing Venus. Someone shouts freedom. The tour becomes a nexus in liminal space.
You mentioned you went up the tour last night. There are people who go up the tour and they tell you about portholes into another dimension.
I do see my night on the tour as a portal of sorts. It was a portal between spiritual and physical, past and present, sky and landscape, myth and reality, all moderated by the stories about Arthurian legend that I've studied during my lifetime. When literature meets the landscape, it conveys amazing powers, the power to see through time and rock and water, and to shape the land itself with imagination. The land of Arthur would not exist without it, for the world is built not of stone, but of stories. Okay, so you didn't see or hear much about women in the landscape, particularly my favorite character, Morgan Le Fay. Morgan, even more than Merlin, who we talked a lot about, is associated with Avalon. She comes from there. Yet it's Merlin who becomes, as I said before, the sales rep for Avalon. The first mention of a Morgan figure makes her a healer. And this is important, let me get there. And in most literary interpretations of the Arthur story, it is she who carries the wounded Arthur away to Avalon to be healed, no matter how difficult their relation had been during Arthur's life. But during her life, she is depicted as jealous, and conniving, and vindictive. It's no wonder that most contemporary adaptations of the story make her into some sort of Disney villain. I've only been to one place from the Arthurian legends that's tied to Morgan. That's the Valley of No Return in Brittany, France. Forgive me for not attempting the French pronunciation of the place. Morgan created this place, according to the legend, to imprison unfaithful knights. And they're trapped there forever once they enter if they have been unfaithful in thought or deed. It seems to me that Morgan is providing character development opportunities for Arthur's knights. So I appreciate adaptations that give her a little bit more credit. Miss of Avalon, it's a great book and a really good movie. Cursed, if you're into binge-watching TV shows on Netflix, that's a good one. And The Green Knight, it's a pretty weird one, but it's a good movie. Anyways, Morgan's story is one of my favorites, and she's a character worth paying attention to. At any rate, we thank you so much for watching and for sharing your time with us this evening.
Which word?
Deet, I thought I heard.
When did you hear it?
Never mind.
Okay.
In the characters of Arthur and Morgan, do you see the allegory in Adam and Eve?
They are often brother and sister. So I have not considered that option, but I will now be thinking about that going forward.
Interesting that that Merlin's the one who has no father, who's born of mother alone. I don't want to do that. But thank you for that observation.
There are lots of biblical comparisons that are made, so yeah, that one's interesting.
You probably noticed that Joseph of Arimathea was there, and he shows up in a couple instances.
Yeah, that man had good shoes. Other questions?
What interested you in this topic to begin with?
Yes. So that last place that we were, I went on that study abroad trip. We were reading lots of Arthurian texts, including Harry Potter, and we went to that place, and I climbed that hill, and it all kind of stuck. I was told this place was Avalon. I had no idea why it would be Avalon. Then I got up there, and all the pieces stuck for me. It just made sense. Thanks for asking. Other questions?
How does this benefit, how could this possibly positively benefit the people of Wales?
Go one more time. Sorry.
How could this positively benefit the people of Wales?
The Arthurian story, or? Sure, okay. So there are lots of different directions that Wales could be supported by this topic. Wales is vital to it being a thing anyways. The Welsh oral traditions are key to Arthuriana.
One of the things that we looked at is this notion that many of Geoffrey's stories that we see as the foundational stories of Arthur and Merlin are really come from earlier Welsh stories and writings that he consolidated, but then conveniently did not truly attribute the Welsh beginnings. And so many people who are Welsh look to a different meaning of Arthuriana, one that's much more closely tied to their literary history.
By no means have we covered everything here. other questions?
Was it difficult getting in touch with Oxford professors and stuff like that through this project?
I sent her an email. She was very nice.
What we find with stories like this is that even though the Oxford professor who has written numerous books, including some very popular books about the Game of Thrones, and is on a lot of TV shows because of that, is interested in talking about this subject, and so would grant us a couple hours of her time to talk to us at length about the things that she holds very close to her heart. So anytime we reached out to somebody, an expert, about this, they seemed quite willing to talk to us and were really tremendously generous with their time.
Other questions? Oh, yes.
Was Stonehenge a burial site?
There are numerous mounds nearby that appear to be burial sites, although Stonehenge itself, it's not clear. There were some remains found there, but I'm not sure it was envisioned as a burial site necessarily. I don't think they suggested that, although there are, like I say, there are some mountains nearby, so it was part of a larger complex at some time in the distant past. At least that's my understanding.
That place it has been interpreted and interpreted and interpreted over and over again. So, hard to tell.
And you should go there on the solstice.
Yes. Other questions? Yeah.
We didn't spend a lot of time asking about the knights or about Lancelot or any of those things. Although I'm trying to think if they were referred to, particularly in our stories about the Mabinogion. But
Yeah, I mean, we picked up all kinds of info, so I probably got some tidbits in my phone somewhere. So probably. Other questions? I'm giving you terrible answers.
I want to thank you very much for joining us here tonight and for watching our film.
Yes, very much.
We enjoyed making it, and of course we made it with a student, one of our
Charlie.
students here, Charlie Lawless, and these are the kinds of things that we like to do. So if you're interested, you should talk to us.
Thanks, guys.